And there's no doubt that what France is engaged in now and what AFISMA will engage in will create problems for the region. Every action has got an unintended consequence, but it has a consequence. And I'm afraid that this situation in Mali is going to be with us I think, for a number of years, if not decades.
The French intervention will cause problems for the region. How big? What's your assessment there?
Let's first start with the positive. If Bamako had fallen and France had not intervened, we would have been facing a catastrophe in the region. So the intervention was necessary to restore the territorial integrity of Mali. So that's, in a sense, the good news. But this is a vacuous region, vast desert areas, no adequate border protection. So the movement from the north to the south by the French forces, that will be followed by the AFISMA forces, will displace some of the Tuareg and other fighters, and they will move into the neighboring area. So what's going to happen in neighboring countries? What is going to happen in Algeria? Does Algeria, who has got a large community in northern Mali, and effectively the northern Mali economy is linked very closely with southern Algeria, what are the implications for that? We don't know. What we're trying to do at the moment is, in a sense, deal with an emergency, as is always the case with armed forces. And the developmental and governance challenges, really, we're trying to deal with that later down the line.
Some North African countries, though, have voiced some concern or some opposition over the deployment of French military in Mali. Are their concerns genuine?
I don't think any African really welcomes the French deployment. In this instance, there's a crisis, and Africa simply, despite all the investment in the African standby force, the ECOWAS component of the African standby force simply was unable to respond timeously. So, end of the day, France, at the request of the Malian government, said, guys, we will go in. They got the support of the UN Security Council, of ECOWAS, eventually also of the African Union, and engaged. But it remains relatively divisive. But in this instance, I think there is a general acceptance that if France had not gone in, that Bamako would have fallen, and that would have been a catastrophe for the region. But now what happens? Getting in is easy. Managing the fallout from what has happened, the relationship between the French forces, AFISMA forces that are slowly coming in, the handover, the command and control, how long does France stay? And who funds this? These are all very big questions. And what happens afterwards to deal with a decades-old problem of lack of development, poor governance, all kinds of ethnic and other issues in Mali?
How long are we looking at, though, in terms of time frames? How long do you think it's going to take for the French military intervention to sort of come to a close? Months, weeks, days?
I think we're looking at months. I think France would like to get out of Mali as quickly as possible, or to withdraw from a formal combat role. That may not take that long, but it depends how far that extends. Is their job to their self-appointed role, or the role that they discuss and negotiate with the African partners, is that to restore a degree of state authority in the major urban areas, or is that to control vast territories of basically uninhabited desert? France can't do that. The combatants can very easily merge into the local population. They can go next door, and these are the issues that I think there's no clarity on exactly when that happens. But I think there's an old adage that says if you break it, it's yours. And getting in is easy, but for France to get out is going to be much more difficult. That handover and the responsibility, having been part of the combatant forces, is going to weigh heavily on France going forward.
The African Union, though, and the ECOWAS have both welcomed, the French military intervention, even though you mentioned earlier that Africa probably doesn't really welcome it. But the African Union and the ECOWAS have publicly stated they do welcome that intervention. Is everybody reading from the same script, do you think?
I think generally yes. I think it's a different situation with the Central African Republic. In the case of Libya, there was a strong sense that NATO, France and the UK in particular had overstepped the mandate. They had abused a mandate that Africa had voted for and that Africa felt was important. African countries on the UN Security Council voted in favor of that. So what Africa will watch very carefully in the case of Mali is this issue of mission creep. At what point does France hand over to a FISMA, to the African forces? Or France has said that it wants to restore the territorial integrity of Mali. Probably only France can do that. The FISMA forces don't have the capabilities to do that. But what is the command and control arrangements around that? And will there be coordination between them? And I think a few months from now, the support that we see for the French involvement at the moment may probably reduce, and questions will start to be asked about the French role.
The French military intervention into Mali, it does have the support of the United States, has the support of bulk of the European Union. But what about the French themselves? Because France had previously said that it was no longer to be, going to be a policeman, so to speak, of African countries. What kind of support is France getting?
I think France went in. They went in having prepared, they'd done their contingency planning for this. And I think the French military and the French foreign policy community feel very strongly that this is a problem that has a direct impact upon Europe, not only because of the drug routes, but the potential jihadists that threaten Europe, that threaten French interest. France has got a considerable diaspora community from Africa, and particularly from Mali. So they went in really looking at their national security interests. But this, given the current very tight fiscal environment and a great inward focus in Europe at the moment because of the global financial crisis, it is quite possible that support for the intervention may drain quite quickly.
Africa is very keen, though, to have this intervention seen as an African-led intervention. But then there is the military intervention by France. Then there is ECOWAS. Then there is the African Union. How does it all tie in? How much say does the African Union and ECOWAS really have on the ground?
Africa has come a long way. The African Union has 10, 12 years ago embarked, with the support very much of the European Union, on the establishment of the African peace and security architecture. As the traditional peacekeeping countries wound down their numbers of troops and forces, Africa partnered originally very much with Europe to build up the African peace and security architecture, of which the African standby force is a core component. The European Union has spent almost €1 billion in investing in the African standby force. There are certain things that haven't been sorted out. We don't have the airlift capability and the logistics, and we certainly don't have the funding to fund these type of missions. So every type of mission, Africa can provide the troops, it can provide political leadership, ownership, a regional solution, but we will continue to look after the international community to provide the funding. And I think there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Mali is a regional and an international problem. It is the mandate of the UN Security Council to be responsible for international peace and security. And what we are arguing from the African perspective is that what happens in Mali and in Somalia, for that matter, should be funded by assessed contributions from the UN. What we want is we want the international community to come to an agreement that where there is a UN mandate and UN support for an intervention in Africa, that this is funded by the international community, and every country pays his or her dues towards that intervention. So that funding issue is a fundamental problem that we are not going to bridge. Africa has now decided, and this is not yet finalized, that the African Union is offering to fund up to 15% of the total AMISOM costs. That is a remarkable step. Not only are we going to be providing the troops, the leadership and the engagement, but we are also starting to make a financial contribution. That is quite a breakthrough and demonstrates Africa's commitment. But beyond that, I think it's going to be very difficult to see that Africa funds €1 billion operation or $1 billion operation a year. We have other challenges that we have to fund.
Donors have pumped $453 million into the Mali war effort. The African Union achieved this major step in resolving the crisis in the West African country when it rallied donors for the cause of the beleaguered West African nation at the 20th African Union Summit, which wound up early in the week in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. The donation is aimed at bridging a gap in the funding required to expedite the deployment of the African-led International Support Mission to Mali, AFISMA.
It is in this spirit of African solidarity and brotherhood that the Assembly of the African Union decided, among other things, as I mentioned, to contribute a total amount of 50 million to the budget of AFISMA.
The funds raised will also contribute to enhancing the capacities and the training of the Malian Defense and Security Forces, the MDSF. In this regard, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, called on all member states, the international community and all partners to contribute to the established trust fund in a spirit of shared responsibility to generously respond to Mali's call for assistance.
The Assembly acted in the spirit of the forthcoming Golden Jubilee of the OAU, driven by their commitment to Pan-Africanism and conviction on Africa's renaissance.
In the same spirit of brotherhood and Pan-Africanism,